Well, 16 teams remain in the NCAA tournament, and we reseed each and every one of them ahead of Thursday's matchups. Isaac, let's do it.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up? Welcome to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college basketball show out there. I am your host, Andy Patton, joined by co-host Isaac Shade.
What up?
What up? We are here. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or first watch of the day. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast. Check us out on YouTube as well. Today, we're going to talk about some of these matchups. We're going to make our Elite Eight predictions heading into Thursday and Friday's games. We're also going to talk about our most outstanding player projections for each region. Excuse me. We want to start
including the East, Andy. Yes,
including the East region. We want to start out the show though talking about reseeding the 16 teams that are remaining. This is kind of a common exercise that we see a lot the week leading up to the Sweet 16, and we have a lot of different seeds. We have 2 1 seeds, 2 2 seeds, but I think we have every seed except a 9 seed left out of the top.
We got a 9. FAU is a 9.
Oh, that's right. We have a 9. Like we have all sorts of teams, various teams, mid-major teams, high major teams. Like it's a pretty unique, eclectic group of teams that are remaining. And so Isaac and I decided to reseed these teams separately, and we're going to look at each other's lists together and kind of discuss the ways that we are a little bit differ on these lists. So we're not taking into account matchups. We're just talking 1 seed, 2 seed, 3 seed, all the way down to 16, just ranking the teams that are left in the field. So Isaac, happened to notice, not surprised by this, our first 4 teams are the exact same. Alabama, Houston, Texas, and UCLA. That is what I have. That is what you have. Are you surprised that we feel similarly on these top 4 teams?
I'm not at all surprised, and part of that is because we talk a lot together, and so we probably like influence each other in that. But I mean, also these are the top 4 seeds remaining, and it's not every year the top seeds perform as such, but these 4 teams I think are all playing at an elite level. Houston has so far been able to show an ability to overcome anything that might be wrong with Marcus Sasser. UCLA has been able to, I would say, overcome and thrive through missing Jalen Clark, and it sounds like things will be okay with the Dembona and Singleton both as well. And so, yeah, I'm right there with you, and I feel no differently about these 4 teams than I did last week.
Well, this is where we get a little different, my friend, because at 5, I have the Wildcats of Kansas State, Jerome Tang's squad here. You have them down at 9. So I want to hear your thoughts on that. I'm just going to share real quick. For me, offensively, this is a team that's outside the top 45 in KenPom. They're 47th. They're a top 20 defensive team. But I think the offense has really shown what it's capable of doing in March. We've seen Markquis Nowell. We talk about guard play a lot on this podcast, and certainly looking ahead. I know we're not supposed to take into account matchups here, but Michigan State was able to slow down guards for Marquette in the last round, and you'd think maybe they'll be able to do the same. But Markquis Nowell is a different animal. He is an absolute machine. He is playing some of the best basketball of his career that we've seen from a guard in a long time. I mean, I hate to throw all the way to the cardiac Kemba comparisons because that's a little bit too strong, but Nowell has played fantastic. You factor in Keontae Johnson and what he has done for this team. I think Jerome Tang is a really, really good coach. We've seen this team play really well defensively. They're battle tested coming through the Big 12. And I think that this team, especially when you factor in the region, looks like a legitimate candidate to be a Final Four squad.
Well, for me, it's my ranking of them as the 8th best team left is not so much about them as it is the teams that I've slotted above them. So 5 through 7 for me are UConn, Gonzaga, Miami. And it's just not that Kansas State is playing poorly. It's just those teams have done more than I even anticipated them doing. And so honestly, I'm right with everything you just said. To me, I just feel more strongly about what those 3 teams I've put ahead of them are doing. But it's funny, while we're not taking the path into consideration, even though I have Kansas State 8th, I'll go ahead and spoil this now. The way this region has played out, I've got them coming out of the East as a Final Four pick. And so that's just the weird thing about how the teams perform versus the path in front of them.
Talk to me about a little bit about UConn, because I have them down at 9, and we have the 6. Gonzaga is 6, Miami at 7. We both have that the same. So you just kind of had UConn a few spots higher, and I'd love to hear kind of where we're, because Adama Sanogo has been playing. I mean, if Markquis Nowell has not been the best player in the NCAA tournament, it is only because Adama Sanogo has been the best player in the tournament. He's the leading scorer right now, a monster on the glass. He's played extremely well. Obviously, his team has. They beat Iona, they beat St. Mary's, 2 solid squads, and I think they have a very good chance against Arkansas, and Sanogo is going to be a big part of that.
Well, I mean, everything you just said, for starters. When you look at KenPom, UConn is 4th in the nation at KenPom, one of only 2 teams at that site that are top 15 in both offensive and defensive efficiency this year at this point. And it's that balance that gives me the trust in them to see them do it, because you look at with Tristan Newton and Jordan Hawkins and everything they're able to do in the backcourt, with Donovan Clingan coming in to support Sanogo and Andre Jackson. I mean, just these dudes I believe in. And I think that UConn is closer to the team we saw rise up to almost number 1 in the nation. What I thought at that point was number 1 in the nation. I think they are playing as that version of themselves again. That's why I have catapulted them to where I have.
We have very, very similar rankings for the rest of this. For the record, I'm not surprised. Our bottom 4 is exactly the same, but looking at kind of that middle group, that 8 through 11. So for me, I have Creighton at 8. I have UConn at 9. I have Arkansas at 10. I have Xavier at 11. And then I have Tennessee at 12. For your list, 8 through 12, Kansas State is at 8. Creighton is at 9. Tennessee is at 10. Arkansas is at 11. And Xavier is at 12. Let's start with Tennessee, because I think that we both have them probably lower than a lot of people might expect. I have them at 12. You have them at 10. So not quite a top 10 team. They're a 4 seed. They're a higher seed than some of the teams that we have ahead of them. We both have Creighton ahead of them, for example. We both have Miami ahead of them, for example. Those are lower seeded teams. We've talked about Tennessee a lot on this show, and I'm kind of just want to hear where we're at with them right now after that win over Duke heading into the Sweet 16.
Well, the funny thing is, it's the same thing I just talked about with Kansas State. If we're just talking about path, I would have them a lot higher, because they, for example, like Miami, they have a much better chance of getting to the Final Four than Miami does, because Miami would have to beat Houston and then Xavier or Texas, whereas Tennessee just has to beat, forgive me, due respect to Florida Atlantic, just has to beat FAU and then either Kansas State or Michigan State to make it to Houston. But if I'm just talking about how much I believe in these teams, yes, Tennessee has bounced back to be number 1 again in defensive efficiency, climbing back over UCLA. But that offense, man, is still sitting there at 60th in the nation. And it's just not enough for me to buy in. When you look at all the other units left in the NCAA tournament, I mean, I'm just scrolling through KenPom here. Gonzaga's defense is lower. San Diego State's offensive, but I mean, it's like I'm barely able to find units that are worse ranked at KenPom than Tennessee's offense. That's why I put them down as low as I did. And you pair that with what we've seen on court with the inconsistency all season long. At some point, that's going to bear out in the tournament. And I know we've hit this a ton, but without Zakai Ziegler, that offense is even worse.
Well, Isaac, I got one more question for you here when looking at our reseeding projections here. Like I said, we both have the same bottom 4 in the same order. That is Michigan State, San Diego State, Florida Atlantic, and Princeton. Talking about those 4 teams, who do you think is the most likely to potentially advance to the Elite 8?
Michigan State, easily.
Easily.
Out of that group. I know FAU is one of the winningest teams in college basketball this year. I think Tennessee is going to give them problems, quite frankly. And then with San Diego State, they're good, but it's the same thing. That offense is pretty far where they're 70th, so their offense is worse than Tennessee's. And when you look at that matchup, I just believe in Alabama so much that I can't see that happening. And then who did I leave off?
Princeton.
With Princeton. I mean, it's like what Princeton done has been impressive. We talked about earlier this week how they just straight up beat Mizzou, right? In this round of 32. But at some point, Creighton's too much Cockbrenner, too much Shireman. So for me, Michigan State. What about you?
Give me Florida Atlantic. Why not? Give me
Ooh,
Florida Atlantic. I think Michigan State has a good chance, but I'm really all in on Kansas State, of course. And with Florida Atlantic, they're top 30 offense in the country, top 35 defense in the country, both per Ken Pom. Pretty balanced team. They're prepared for Tennessee. We've seen a lot of quotes from them about we're ready for a rock fight. We know. I think the coach said that they were going to study Australian rugby rules before the game because they know about the physicality of Tennessee's players. And Tennessee's an inconsistent outside shooting team. And I think there's a chance that if Florida Atlantic comes in with a good game plan and limits Tennessee's outside shooting opportunities, that they could pull off an upset here.
We will wait and see what Dusty May's Owls do, Andy. I like what you said there. Well, while we didn't consider the matchups in this exercise, we have to going forward because Andy and I are going to get to our Elite Eight picks and our picks to move into the Final Four when Sunday is all said and done. That's coming up next. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The tournament, it's heating up, and now's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Andy, that's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So download the FanDuel Sportsbook app right now. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use, and that allows you to bet on everything from the money line to point scores and three-pointers drained. Make sure you check out all the lines for these games that we're talking about for the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. In fact, we will give them to you as we talk about them. And now, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So, friends, do not miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/locked-on to learn all about it. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Andy, Sweet 16 starting tonight. I can't believe it's here. Yeah. I'm so excited. And then tonight and Friday with the Elite 8 games to follow on Saturday and Sunday. So, Andy, why don't we go region by region here? I'll start with the games in the East. Michigan State versus Kansas State, tipping off at 6:30. And this game is Michigan State by a game and a half. And then after that, we'll have Florida Atlantic against Tennessee. That game will tip off 30 minutes after the conclusion of the first one, with the Volunteers favored by 4.5. These games in the most famous arena in the world, Madison Square Garden in New York City. Andy, what are you looking at in these two games?
I think it'll be interesting to see how Michigan State attempts to stop Markquis Nowell and Keontae Johnson. Locked On Spartans host Matt Sheehan talked about this a little bit on the Locked On Bracket Breakdown, which you should be able to find on all of our podcast platforms and feed if you haven't yet. But he thinks that Michigan State's defense was very good against Tyler Kolek against Marquette, but can they stop Markquis Nowell and Keontae Johnson? Because they have the guard play, they have the talent, they have the coaching acumen in Tom Izzo to potentially slow down Nowell, but can they do that and stop Keontae Johnson? And can they score enough points? Kansas State's a good defensive team, and I think Michigan State has been a bit more inconsistent as an offensive team. And so for me, that's kind of the main thing I'm looking at. Michigan State is favored. I'm not buying it. I think Kansas State's going to win. I think it's going to be a close game. I really do. But give me the Wildcats in that one.
I like it. Same for me. Wildcats.
Okay. Let's take a look. Florida Atlantic, Tennessee. The next game there, of course, like we said, Tennessee is favored in that one. And as much as I like Florida Atlantic, I do think they have a chance in this one. Absolutely. I still think I got to roll with the Vols. The guard play has been really good, even without Zakai Ziegler. The physicality that they have up front gives me an advantage there. And then in that Elite Eight matchup, give me Kansas State over Tennessee. I think that the highest seed here is going to win out. I think that they're not as expected. I mean, again, they're not even favored against Michigan State. So it may seem like it's not bold to pick the 3 seed in a region where that's the highest team that's still remaining. But for me, I think the Wildcats are going to do it. I think it's going to be in the Final Four, and it's going to be a really, really incredible first season for Jerome Tang.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. While I don't trust Tennessee to win a national championship, and their several metrics suggest that they won't, both the offense, the 3-point shooting, etc. The defense certainly could get them there if if they do what they did against Duke last weekend, my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's definitely enough, though, to get them over the hump against Florida Atlantic. But then, just like you, my friend, I have Kansas State moving on to the Final Four. What a wild thing that will be if it comes true in Jerome Tang's first year for this team coming out of the cellar in the preseason Big 12 predictions.
Let's move on to the West.
Yeah. Do it.
Got Gonzaga, UCLA, an all-time matchup, a classic. It's been a classic twice before in 2006 and 2021. It's probably going to be a classic again in Las Vegas. And then, of course, we have Arkansas versus UConn. That game is at 7:15 Eastern time on Thursday. UConn is favored by 4.5 points. Going back to the Gonzaga UCLA game, UCLA is favored by 1.5 points. Isaac, you sticking with the favorites in these games? What are your thoughts here?
Yes, in one of them, I am. You didn't think I was going to say that. Yeah, great job by Arkansas in what they did. And I think if they can get Nick Smith going, they've got a really good shot here. But this is where some of the earlier season injuries unfortunately hurt them, because it's just not quite enough to be able to stop Adama Sanogo. And I think he continues, as you said earlier, to play as the best player in the tournament to this point. But I do have Gonzaga upsetting technically UCLA. Even, I mean, it's a 1.5 point spread, but I have Gonzaga. I apologize to everyone out there. I have Gonzaga in my national championship game, and I'm not moving off of that. I think this is where the Jalen Clark injury begins to really show against Gonzaga, who is such an elite offensive team. I hope UCLA is going to be able to stop them because they've got other elite defenders like Tiger Campbell. But without Jalen Clark, I just don't see it happening. Give me the Bulldogs then beating UConn in the Elite Eight for themselves to move on to the Final Four. What about you, Andy Patton?
Well, I have the exact same for almost the exact same reasons. Give me Gonzaga over UConn advancing. Gonzaga's defense is an issue. We have seen it crop up. They don't have rim protection in the way that they've had in the past. It turns out that when you lose a player like Chet Holmgren, it tends to impact your ability to defend the rim. I think that's going to be a factor for them. I think it's definitely going to be a factor for them against UConn. And I think even against UCLA, Tiger Campbell and Amari Bailey and Jaime Jaquez and the way those guys get downhill and get towards the rim, it's going to be an issue. But at the end of the day, Gonzaga doesn't need to play elite defense. They just need to score more points. And I think that they're going to do that against both UCLA and against UConn. And I think they're going to find themselves in a Final Four in a year where many people thought Gonzaga was down, thought that they weren't going to make it. I have heard a lot of really negative comments about the Zags this year. And now it looks like, hey, they're in the Sweet 16 with a really good chance to go to the Elite Eight and possibly even further than that.
It's funny how it always seems to play out that way. It might be a down year, but you never know what's going to happen in the tournament. Andy, let's move to Friday and the South region, where we get San Diego State against the #1 overall seed Alabama Crimson Tide. 6:30 Eastern time there on Friday. Bama by 7.5 at FanDuel. And then the nightcap 30 minutes after that first game ends, the Cinderella seed, the only double-digit seed left, Princeton against Creighton. That game is Blue Jays favored by 9.5. What do you have in these two games, Andy?
I'm going with the favorites. I think that this is not going to be the most exciting region, unfortunately. I hope I'm wrong. If San Diego State puts up a ridiculous fight against Alabama, that would be really, really fun to see. San Diego State, a very experienced team. We talk about guard play. We talk about experienced guard play. They have that. But do they have the athletes to compete with Alabama for a full 40 minutes? My guess is no. I think it's going to be a fairly close game. I think San Diego State's going to make it more of a rock fight than perhaps Alabama fans will feel comfortable with. But give me the Crimson Tide in that one, and give me Creighton over Princeton. And no disrespect to Princeton. It's awesome that they're here. We have seen teams in this position advance to the Elite Eight as recently as last year for St. Peter's. So it certainly can happen. But Creighton's, I think they were the best 6 seed by a pretty considerable margin. And there were good 6 seeds this year. TCU was a solid 6 seed. Kentucky was a very good 6 seed. Like, we saw good 6 seeds this year, but Creighton was the best out of that group. And I think that them advancing to play Alabama is kind of how I projected this bracket to go as soon as Arizona lost. And I still feel that way.
Yeah, no different from me. And unfortunately, I'm with you. I think this is the most of the 4 regions in this second weekend because the others just have all sorts of interesting stuff going on. It plays out to me pretty easily for Bama to advance on to the Final Four, their first one, but you never know what might happen. But Andy, Midwest, these games in Kansas City. Friday, we got the first one is my favorite matchup of the Sweet 16 round. Miami versus Houston, 7:15. Cougars are favored by 7.5. First off, that's way too big a line for this game. And then the nightcap tipping off 30 minutes after the conclusion is Texas against Xavier. And that game is Longhorns by 4.5. That feels like a little bit more of a reasonable line. But Andy, this region is the one if the South is the one I'm least intrigued by. Thankfully, the other region on Friday I am most intrigued by. I love both of these games. What say you?
Yeah, the Houston-Miami matchup is so fun. You got Jarris Walker versus Norchad Omier in the front court. You have Marcus Sasser and Jamal Shedd in the backcourt against Nigel Pack and Isaiah Wong in the backcourt for Miami. You have Tremont Mark versus Jordan Miller as kind of the wings. Like, it is a elite matchup between two very athletic, very well-coached, very disciplined, very talented teams. I think this is going to be an extraordinary basketball game. Seeing the other lines, seeing how close the line is between like Gonzaga and UCLA, seeing the line for Michigan State and Kansas State, and then seeing a 7.5 point spread between Houston and Miami is baffling to me. I do think Houston's going to win. I have Houston advancing all the way to the Final Four. I have them advancing over Texas. I have Texas beating Xavier in that game. But for me, a 7.5 point spread is pretty big. I think that game's going to come down right to the absolute wire.
Well, this is the one region where we differ slightly, because I have, and this is what I've had in my bracket from the very beginning, I'm sticking with it until I see differently, Miami upsetting the number 2 overall seed Houston Cougars, Texas winning as well, but then the Longhorns getting Rodney Terry to the Final Four. And boy, if that wouldn't be the final nail in the coffin of giving him the head coaching job, I don't know what would be. So I have Texas advancing out of the Midwest region into Houston for the Final Four.
Well, Isaac, we have to talk about who are going to be the biggest stars on the biggest stage. Thursday, Friday, millions of people going to be watching. Everybody's tuned in. Who are the players that are going to be talked about when we get into the Sweet 16? We're going to talk about that next. All right, Isaac, let's talk players. We talked teams, we talked matchups, we reseeded everybody. I want to talk about the guys who are going to make a name for themselves. We mentioned Kemba Walker 10 years ago when he made that kind of run. I don't know if we're going to have another Kemba Walker this year. Maybe it'll be Markquis Nowell, who knows, but there are always players who step out and really cement themselves in March Madness history. Let's talk about who those guys are going to be. Before we do that, though, I do have a question that I wanted to ask you that we didn't quite get to in that first segment. Creighton, Arkansas. Two teams that were in the top 10 before the season started, two teams that fell off as the season went on, two teams that ended up getting lower seeds than they would have expected to, and yet they're still dancing. Creighton, of course, is a 6 seed, like we mentioned, Arkansas as an 8 seed. Who do you think out of that group is more likely to be the team that actually advances all the way into the Final Four, if you had to pick one of them?
I feel like I got to say Arkansas with that. But that West region, man, is brutal. Here's the thing. I think Creighton has the bigger opportunity to get to the Elite 8, definitely, because of who they're playing in Princeton. I think Arkansas is the more talented team.
Yeah.
But just by nature of like percentage capability, I know that they'd have to beat Alabama or maybe San Diego State. Like, it could open up. That would be Creighton I'm talking about. But I think ultimately, give me Creighton over Arkansas in this, specifically because of path. Because with Arkansas, man, beating UConn, that's a massive task. And then beating Gonzaga or UCLA, that's just too much to ask for me to do both of those. And so I think it's more likely that Creighton is probably a no-brainer over Princeton. And then I give them a better shot at beating Bama in one game than I do Arkansas at beating UConn and then Gonzaga or UCLA in the second game.
Well, let's talk potential most outstanding players for each region from this point forward. I want to talk about the guys, the dudes who are actually doing the work on the court. And we each pit our lists for each region, our most outstanding player. We only had one overlap, believe it or not, and that is in the West region. And we went with the big fella. We went with the mustached legend, Drew Timme from Gonzaga. He's already had a monstrous tournament. If Gonzaga comes out of that region, even if they beat UCLA and lose before getting into the Final Four, it's hard for me to imagine that Drew Timme is not going to be the player most talked about coming out of that region. Looking out to the South as well, we both had Alabama players, but we had different ones.
Ooh.
Isaac, start with you. I would love to hear who you think is going to be the outstanding player coming out of the South.
First off, if it's not Gonzaga, if UConn comes out of the West, that wouldn't shock me because Adama Sanogo we've already talked about. But getting back to the South, this is such a boring pick, but Brandon Miller is Brandon Miller. As long as his groin is healthy, I see Alabama winning this region and him being the MOP. However, as I said on yesterday's show, I wouldn't be surprised if part of the reason is because who you're about to name as your MOP. So I could see this as a very real possibility as well.
Yeah, give me Javon Quinterly. Javon Quinterly has been playing some outstanding basketball for the Crimson Tide lately. Him getting re-brought into the starting lineup really kind of reinvigorated this team in a significant way. And I think there's a really good chance that I think Alabama's going to the Final Four. We've talked about that already. We kind of litigated that. But for me, Brandon Miller's going to get his stuff. He's going to do his thing. But I think Javon Quinterly is going to be a big factor, if not the biggest factor, for this team advancing past San Diego State, advancing past Creighton, and finding themselves in the Final Four.
Yes, agreed. Andy, what about the East? Let's go there. I know that we both have Kansas State coming out of that region, but I think it's the same story as the Alabama conversation where we each have a different player as the MOP of the region. Why don't you start with who you've got?
Give me Markquis Nowell, man. Give me the guard. What did John Calipari call him? The little kid,
the little kid, and then he called him and apologized.
Yes, I'm glad that he did that, and I'm sure he didn't mean it as disrespectfully as it came across. But Markquis Nowell has just been absolutely balling, and I don't see any reason why that's going to stop. Yes, Michigan State's a good defensive team. Yes, Tennessee is a very, very good defensive team, the defensive team, and they're gonna send everything at him. But he feels like a player of destiny right now. He feels like he's going on a run, and I have a feeling that he's going to put up big numbers against Michigan State, big numbers against Tennessee, come into the Final Four, and he's going to be the person that people are talking about in college basketball.
I love what you just said there, and it's precisely why I have chosen Keontae Johnson to be my MOP. I think they played Tennessee in the Elite Eight. Tennessee throws the book, whatever that phrase is, at Markquis Nowell to say somebody else has got to beat us, and it's going to be Keontae Johnson that's going to do precisely that. And that might be a little bit of a heart pick, because what we've had so many cool stories we've talked about that, like if this team goes to the Final Four, Jerome Tang, if any of that kind of stuff, but would just love that storyline of Keontae Johnson literally picking himself up off the court from what happened at Florida and being the MOP. Andy, let's end in the Midwest, where the one bracket we have different teams advancing to the Final Four, and then obviously have different players as our MOP. What do you have?
I got Jarris Walker. It's another instance of picking the more obvious team, but not necessarily the most obvious player. I think Marcus Sasser is probably the player people would pick, but I'm not sure he's at 100%. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. It's hard to say, but Jarris Walker is an absolute machine. He's a freshman who looks like he's 27. He's really strong, really physical, really skilled, does a lot of things well. I think he's a tough matchup for Miami. I think he's a tough matchup for Texas as well on the block. And I think if Houston does advance past Miami and past Texas, it will almost certainly be because Jarris Walker has really, really good games. So I think if I'm picking Houston to come out of that region, I got to pick Jarris Walker as the guy who's doing the most damage.
I love it. I have Texas's Dylan Dessou. We've often said in recent weeks, Andy, that Texas just has so many dudes that could blow up for 20 in a game or more. But lately it's been Dylan Dessou that's been the dude, even in this tournament. And so I don't see anything different happening. I have Texas coming out, and I have Dylan Dessou leading the way. By the way, folks, we would love to hear your picks for the Sweet 16, for the Elite Eight, for these MOP choices as well.
Well, that's going to do it for us today. More content coming your way. We got more talk about the Elite Eight, about the Sweet 16 coming every single day for the rest of March as the field gets whittled down once again. We'll only have 4 teams left by this time next week. It's almost sad in a way, but I'm so excited to see how the rest of this stuff plays out. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us wherever you already get your podcasts. Leave us a review, follow us on iTunes, or leave us a review on iTunes, follow us on Twitter, all of that great stuff. We'll be back at you starting tomorrow. For now, though,
peace.